Before we begin, all right, all you worm danglers, I'd like to welcome you to the first ever Garage Talk Mondays. Yeah, I think that's what we'll go with. We'll go with Garage Talk Mondays. I think once a week on Mondays I'm going to upload a video. I want to just sit down and talk with you guys. Get to know me a little bit, get to know some of my friends a little bit, stories of my life, things like that. Just something a little different, just trying something different, something new. Let me know if you like it. Comment down below if you do like it. If you don't like it, then don't watch. So you gotta give me a little bit to get on with this. It's a little nervous for me, or I'm a little nervous. Boy, I can't even use my words. I've only had one. I swear this is the first one. I want to start off this week with a big one, and by that I mean a big story. Something happened when I was in 8th grade. I was about 14 years old. I lived at home with my mom, of course, and by the description or the title of this video, you probably kind of know what I'm getting at. And yes, I did witness a murder, and that's the story that I'm going to tell you today. Like I said, I was 14 years old, living at home. My mom had a live-in boyfriend. My parents had been divorced for years. I think my mom and dad got divorced when I was in like 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, something like that. We lived in Texas when they got divorced. We moved back to Illinois. I started 5th grade here in Illinois. By the time I was in 8th grade, my mom had a boyfriend who lived with us. His name was Ed. Ed was a great guy. I obviously didn't know him earlier in life, so I can't really vouch for him then. From what I've seen, he was a great guy, loved kids. He treated us very nicely. Treated us like we were his own, you know. Lived in our house with us. You know, I mean, you gotta remember, this has been like 19 years almost since all this happened, so you do have to forgive me a little bit on some of the dates and descriptions and details and things of the story. I did call my mom earlier actually and ask her some things like dates and things like that, because I just couldn't remember it all. Plus I tried to block out a lot of it. I tried not to think about it, but I've had people ask me over the years, you know, what happened? Oh, I didn't know that happened to you, you know, things like that. And they're like, oh wow, you really did. So it's kind of why I'm doing this. I want to be able to talk about the things, maybe even make myself feel better, you know, help you guys understand me. Anyway, that's besides the point. Okay, so back to the story. So I'm in 8th grade. I believe it was a Saturday morning. I was sitting at home. I was in our den. We had what we called our den. It was kind of our computer room. We had a TV and a fireplace in there. We'd go in there, and don't think by that description that we were like rich people. We really weren't. But we had this what we called our den, and I was sitting in there playing some games on the computer or looking up songs on Napster. I think Napster was big then, and I was just kind of hanging out. Ed had came home from work. He had worked Saturday morning, and he had come home. It was, I want to say it was probably a little after noon. He worked at a local factory, so they got off at noon on a Saturday. They come home. And like I said, please don't hold me to a lot of these specifics, because I don't really remember all of them. I just kind of remember the basics of it. But he came home, and he wasn't there very long. Something happened the night before, and that's kind of part of the story. The night before, on a Friday night, he went to a basketball game here in my town because his son played basketball. I believe he was in high school at that time, so he played basketball for the high school. So Ed had went to the game to kind of see his son. Obviously, Ed was divorced, so you know he wanted to go see his son play. He had come from a bad divorce. Him and his wife had a bad divorce, bad breakup. I can't really speak to much of that because I really don't know. A lot of things I heard were just kind of hearsay, and you really don't know what to believe. But he came from a bad divorce, so he was like, okay, my son's playing tonight. So my mom and him went to the game. Apparently he had a run-in with his father-in-law, which would be his son's grandfather, or his ex-wife's dad, basically. Had a run-in with them. Anyway, came back home. Shortly after they had came home, the police showed up at our house. They arrested Ed because they basically said he was there harassing them and this and that, which wasn't the case. He had just went there to see his son play. I think he got up to go to the concession stand and they cornered him and they got into an argument. The basic of the story. So Ed had to go to jail. My mom went and bailed him out. It was like $75 because it was like a, I don't want to say public intoxication, obviously, because they weren't drinking, but it was like they made a scene basically, so that's why they took him in. And anyway, come home, everything's said and done, whatever. Next morning, Ed goes to work, gets off work, comes home, wasn't even home for 10 minutes, and I heard him call for my mom. And it sounded really weird, kind of a weird call. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go see what's happening. So I get up, I walk in there, and he is putting on his jacket. And it was in like February, I believe. It was end of January, February, I think is when this happened. And anyway, he was getting his jacket on and walking outside. And my mom asked him, you know, what's going on? He said that SOB, talking about his ex-brother-in-law, said that SOB just drove past the house. And where we lived, we actually lived on a road that if you kept going straight, it was a dead end. If you turned, we lived on a corner, and if you turned down there, you had to go down, around, and there was a cul-de-sac at the end, and then you'd come back. When you came back up, you had to go right past our house. So there was no way of going past our house without having to come back past our house. So he seen him go by. He said, I'm going to tell that SOB to leave me alone. Walks outside. He goes out there and he stands by the mailbox. I walk out there. I said, well, I'm going to stand right here, you know, and see what happens. So I stood on the front porch. My mom stood there next to me. And sure enough, here he comes. He was in a little black Ford Ranger. Comes around the corner. Stops, pulls out a 12-gauge shotgun, points it right at Ed. They start arguing. From what I can remember, he said Ed was basically telling him not to come by the house anymore, and he said something about leaving the kids alone, and Ed said something about don't talk to me about my kids because you haven't paid an ounce of child support your entire life, blah, 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 blah. And they argued for a few minutes. About that time, my mom turned around and went back inside. I was just thinking that she had went to get the phone. And she walked inside, and before she could come back out the door, the ex-brother-in-law racked the shotgun back. And when he did, he actually already had it loaded. And when he racked it back, he actually ejected one shell, which fell on the ground, and he put another shell into the chamber. At that point, Ed had, you know, kind of naturally reacted to it and turned. When he turned is when the ex brother-in-law fired a shot and basically shot him with I think it was double-aught buckshot right in the side. So it basically killed Ed instantly. He dropped to the ground. At that point, I had grabbed the phone from my mom, and I had yelled at him, the brother-in-law, ex-brother-in-law, and I said, you know, get the F out of here. My mom was yelling, telling him to get the F out of here, and my mom was walking across the yard towards him, and he pointed the gun at my mom, and I about that point, I was running out there yelling with a phone in my hand. Before I could get off the step, I believe I tried to call 911 at that point and couldn't. And I was too focused on what was going on with my mom that I couldn't get 911 to dial. I threw the phone down and I ran out to the yard of my mom. And about that time, he took off. Now, keep in mind, this is 2000. We live in a very small town, rural Illinois, for those of you who don't know. In that time, we did not have in our county a 911 system. So you actually had to physically dial the actual like police department or whatever. And I didn't know the number. Obviously, everything was going on. I couldn't just pull the number out of my head at that point. So I continue to yell at the neighbors. The neighbors had to come outside because they heard the noise. So I'm standing there yelling at the neighbors, call 911, call 911, call 911. I see that one of the neighbors turned around to go back inside. I ran over to where Ed was laying. Obviously a bunch of little holes in his body. I'm trying to hold on to him. I don't, just put pressure on, whatever. Trying to think of anything that I can remember from any kind of CPR classes that I had taken, because I actually had taken some CPR classes at this point, because they offered it at school. And I remember trying to put pressure on him. About that time, somebody came, it was one of the neighbors came up, and they said, go get some towels. We got to get something to put pressure on. So I ran back inside, got some towels, which is kind of weird because I remember something that got brought up not too long ago when I was actually talking about this, is that I remember touching like the door handles and stuff, but I had blood all over my hands, but I don't ever remember seeing anybody clean all that up or anything like that. So it's kind of weird. Sorry, I'm talking too fast here. I'm trying to remember all those little details and everything I could tell you to answer any questions. But so I remember getting some towels. I ran back outside. We put towels on him, which at the time I didn't know. I didn't know that he was killed instantly. I just knew that I was trying to save him. Anything we could do to try to save his life. My mom was just crying hysterically. By that point, more neighbors had come over to see what happened. And I remember, I'm sure at the time it probably seemed like a really long time for an officer to get there or for anybody to get there. But for some reason now I remember just looking up at that point and seeing an officer coming down the road. I was trying to remember the officer's name because I met him. I actually knew him quite well. But anyway, he come down. He pulled out his jump bag out of the back and started doing like CPR and all that kind of stuff. And I remember seeing the ambulance come. I don't remember the ambulance actually getting on scene. I do remember at some point I had went with one of my neighbors back in the house. They took me back in the house and said, you got to get back in the house. And I remember standing in my den, and my brother and I, we've always been into music. We've always had big speakers and stuff. So in our den with our computer and everything, we had a big stereo in there too, so we could listen to music real loud. So I remember standing in there and hearing what I thought was really weird at the time. I heard what sounded like some kind of an electrical issue, like a kind of noise through the stereo. And the only thing I could think was maybe that they were trying to use the paddles, the defibrillator or something. And for some reason, I don't know, maybe back then there was some kind of a radio frequency thing that was going on. That's what I was hearing. But I just remember thinking, oh my God, that's what's going on. Oh my God, he's dead or whatever. And my friend, who was my neighbor, said, let's go down to my house. So we went out the back door because they wanted to get me away. So we went down to his house for a little bit. And next thing I know, his dad come down and said, hey, we need to get you to the hospital. They're taking him to the hospital. We need to get you to the hospital. He said, I'll take you there. I said, okay, fine. I was just, of course, my mind's just going a million miles an hour. I don't remember a lot of the details. I mean, I'm sure that was actually a decent period of time. I'm sure it was a decent period of time. But it just looking back on it now, it doesn't seem like it was that long. So I hopped in his truck, and I remember he went through town, got on the interstate, and he had like an F-150 that was a stick shift, and I think it was only like a 6-cylinder truck, but he had that sucker pegged. I remember looking over, and we were doing like 85, and he had his foot to the floor, and that was like as fast as we could go. And he was like, "I'm gonna get you there, buddy. I'm gonna get you there. Don't worry." And I'm like, you know, where's my mom? You know, where did she go? Because at the time it was just me and my mom and Ed that was at home. My brother, I think he had gotten up that morning and went to work. I can't remember where he was working at the time, but it seems to me like he had gotten up and went to work. And I believe, from what I remember them telling me, was that he had came home and picked up my mom and took my mom to the hospital. I don't remember if that's true. I need to ask my brother, see what he remembers, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. So anyway, we get to the hospital. By the time I get there, there's actually a few of my family members there, and they walk me in, and I said, "Okay, what happened? You know, how's he doing? What's wrong there?" They said, "Oh," they said, "he passed." So I kind of lost it for a minute, but at the same time, I didn't really cry a whole bunch because I was young. I didn't really take grasp of what just happened. The only thing I remember was, oh my God, I just watched somebody get shot and killed in my front yard. I wasn't at the hospital very long. And my dad had come down and because we had called him and told him what happened, my dad had come back. I said, "Dad, I don't want to go home. I don't want to go back to my house." My dad said, "I'll take you home. I'll take you to my house." So my dad at the time, he actually lived about, I think it's like 35, 40 miles away from here. So he took me and we went to his house. A little later in the night, we get a call from the police department, and it was the officer that was the first one on the scene. He said he had to come up and ask me some questions. He had to get my statement. So he drove up. I remember it being late, and I had to do a written statement. Of course, keep in mind, I'm in 8th grade. I'm 14 years old. I'm just like, oh my gosh. So I had to write a statement about what just happened. That's an experience I don't want anybody to ever go through, because trying to get through that point in time and then having to go sit down and go back and look and remember everything that happened, every detail that happened. And I'm like, man, I just can't do it. I can't do it. I eventually do it. It takes me some time, but I sit down and write, and I talk to him, and we talk everything out. And then he leaves. I stay with my dad like a night or two, and then finally I go home. And I go home to be with my mom. My mom's at home. Everything's calmed down. We go through the funeral and everything. And I asked my mom a couple of these questions because I couldn't remember. It seemed like it wasn't very long into the trial. She said that this all happened in February, I believe, is what she told me. And I think she said it was in like April or June was the trial. So it actually, the legal system progressed pretty quick, which is not something you always hear. Usually it takes a year or two before that all to happen, or not, maybe not in some cases, I guess, but everything I've always heard, they always take like a year to get to trial because there's appeals and there's this and there's that, and they gotta file for this motion, that motion, and whatever. But it was only a couple months. So once again, I missed an entire week of school my 8th grade year because of all that to begin with. Then we come to time for trial. It's towards the end of my 8th grade year. And I had to miss a whole nother week because of the trial. So I was a main witness, I guess. I'm not sure who other witnesses there were, but I know that I was the main witness because I was standing there when the shot was fired. And I know my mom, I don't even know if my mom even testified. I have to ask her that too. But I couldn't be in the courtroom for the entire trial, I guess. I couldn't be in there to hear the whole thing and all the, you know, scientific data, whatever, blah, 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 blah. So I remember I basically had to sit outside the courthouse for an entire week. And then the day I actually had to go in to do my testimony, I had to sit in a room with some other people who I didn't really know, but they were all people who were like my neighbors that I just didn't really know them. And we had to sit there for like hours upon hours. And I remember just sitting there just going, oh my God, let's get this over with. So anyway, we finally got to go in to do my testimony, and the defense attorney just basically just went after me because in an interview, I actually had to do a video interview where I had to explain everything. So they had to, basically, I went to the county building with some detectives, and I had to sit down. They videotaped my whole statement, and we had been talking about guns. And so at some point, I had said that I was standing on the front step, and I had threw the gun down, which what I meant was I threw the phone down. So at trial, she tore me apart on that. She said, you know, you had a gun, da da da, or he had a gun and he gave it to you and you hid the gun. And I said, there was no gun. No, we had one pistol in the house, which was a .22, and I didn't even really knew where it was at the time. Actually, I didn't even find it until after all this had happened. We were going through stuff and we found the gun. So we didn't even really know anything about that. So anyway, she tore me apart on that, and I kept saying, no, look, there's no gun. It's just a phone, whatever. Anyway, trial ends. They find him guilty. They actually, instead of first-degree murder, which is what we were going for, they found him guilty of second-degree murder. Basically, they tried to go with the self-defense thing, like, oh, Ed had a gun, and the other guy didn't, or the other guy had a gun, so he was basically, you know, trying to defend himself against Ed. But that never happened, but that's what they were trying for. I mean, they have to have something to go by to try, like, you know, for the defense or whatever. So they get it because, and I feel like a lot of it was probably because of that video thing. So that kind of always weighed heavily on me, was because I accidentally said the gun, which there was never a gun. There was never a gun. We didn't have one. My brother didn't have a gun at the time. No, you know, whatever. So that was just always kind of something that always weighed on me. But anyway, they get him for second-degree murder. He gets sentenced to 14 years in prison, 7 years with good behavior. 7 years down the line, I am living with my wife, and I work for a local truck shop, and I come to find out that he gets out. He is literally living in the apartment complex behind the building that I'm working in. Weirdest thing ever. I end up even running into him one time. I was working on a car, and he had come into the garage because it wasn't my house or whatever, and I think he realized who I was, turned around and walked out. So, you know, we lived pretty close, so it was always kind of weird. That man has since gone back to prison, and I believe he's passed away now. I think he had a heart attack or something, but that's besides the point. So anyway, that's kind of the story of how this had all happened, how this has all gone down over the years. It's something I've had to live with for, you know, like I said, for 19 years now. It's 2019, this happened in 2000. So 19 years I've dealt with that. And I think that probably also has a part to do with my anxiety and some of my issues that I have personally, and which anxiety is something we're going to talk about on this new Garage Talk Mondays. I will do that in another video, because I know there's a lot of people out there who have anxiety, and I also know that there's a lot of people out there who think they have anxiety, but they probably don't. I think they just use that as a crutch. I think a lot of people have depression and don't really have anxiety. I know they kind of go hand in hand, but I really feel deep down like anxiety is a whole nother thing. Anyway, back to the other thing. So, looking back now, you know, it's something that's probably changed me for the better. Yeah, I have some issues from it. I know a lot of people don't realize, you know, the things that have gone on. One of the things that actually went on, this is something else I was going to talk about, was there was a time where, that was really when the internets were coming around, and there was a group chat. I think it was on one of the school's websites or something. There was like a group chat area, and it was a big topic at the time. And I remember looking back and just could not believe they tried to make me out as a big liar. Like I was some lying kid. I was 14 years old. I didn't know, you know, I should lie to hide something like this. Are you kidding me? At the time, I wanted to be a police officer. I didn't want to lie. Why would I lie? You know, that's something that's always really pissed me off, and it pissed me off through the entire trial, because they kept saying, that kid's a liar. He's a liar. And I think that's why I take a lot of things to heart now, is because they tried to make me out to be such a liar, and I never lied about anything, and it just pisses me off. I probably ought to regroup. Hang on. But it's always pissed me off that they tried to make me out as a liar. And it was a slip of the tongue. We were talking guns, you know. I've always been pro Second Amendment. I've always been a gun guy. You know what? I wish I would have had a gun at the time. Maybe things would have went differently. Maybe Ed would still be alive, you know. But I didn't lie about anything. And the fact that they use that to get him a lesser sentence really pisses me off. You know what I mean? But anyway, it's all said and done now. Like I said, I feel like I'm a better person from it. I think I've learned a lot from it. You know, it's just something. If you guys have ever experienced something like this, let me know. You know, tag yourself or tell me down in the tell me in the comments. You know, let me know. You know, we can talk about it. Whatever, you know, big incident that happened to you in your life. I want to bring some more people in on this Garage Talk Mondays and hear some other stories. I'll tell you as much about me as I can. You know. Like I said, I want to talk about anxiety. I want to tell you how I got into fishing, how me and Kayla met, things like that. I want to go through that kind of stuff with you guys. That way, you guys get to know me a little bit better, and then hopefully I get to know you guys through that too. You know. So, like I said, you know, comment down in the comments what you think. If you got any more questions for me. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so that way you can get notifications every time that I drop a new video. And that's all I got for you guys. I hope this video hits you somewhere deep down inside, you know. I'm pouring my heart out to you here. So anyway, we will see you guys next time on another episode of Worm Dangler TV. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on another episode of Worm Dangler TV and Garage Talk Mondays. See you guys.